Welcome, everybody, to Indivisible TX Lege Live. It's been a week since the 87th Texas legislature completed its 140 days as they work to pass legislation that we hope would solve some of the problems that we all experience and see in Texas. Unfortunately, that wasn't quite the outcome of the legislative session, and we're going to dive into some of those stories. Since the end of the session, we encourage our organizers to take a few weeks off just to recoup, reflect, and to start getting prepared for what's next. And so over the next few weeks, you're going to see us provide different content reflecting on everything. But let's jump into some of the big stories. With us, as always, is Jason Sugg, our Twitter commander-in-chief. Jason, how are you doing this Sunday?
I'm good, Alex. How are you?
Doing pretty good. I think there was maybe a day or two where there was some rest that I mentioned we're encouraging everyone to do. But as I've talked to other organizers, especially Antoinette, who's a part of the team, it's definitely an area I struggle with.
Yeah, I think that's a commonality among us.
So how's your week been since Tex Lege stopped making massive headlines on an hourly basis?
Yeah, well, it's just been taking some deep breaths and trying to bring my nervous system down a bit from all the fist shaking I was doing during the session.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of it. And some of these stories you've got lined up for us are going to maybe have us revisit those shake fisting moments during the ledge.
That's right. So just breathe through it if it comes up for you, right? It really was a maddening session, right? And as I've been sitting here thinking about it this week, like reflecting back, like what you said a moment ago about that, we'd hoped that they were focused on all this stuff, and it was just the priorities were so misaligned with what the state needs right now, and the things that were they spent time on are things that are actually like deeply unpopular, even here in Texas. And yet they're the things that ate up the legislative session and that got passed.
And just to put some context, right? Because at the beginning of session, January 12th was the official start of the session. 6 days before, there was this huge insurrection and attack on the Capitol because of the results of the 2020 election. And so many people being fooled by this, big lie that the election was not secure and safe and everything. And so they're still in January trying to stop the process from, the transition of power for President Biden. And a lot of Texans participated. A lot of Texas leaders participated in that,
including our own indicted Attorney General Ken Paxton,
including our own indicted FBI investigated Attorney General Ken Paxton, and just constant, source of shame for us Texans here. The pandemic is still definitely happening in January at the start of the ledge session. Vaccines are on the brink of really being rolled out. People are waiting, trying to understand what's happening with that. People are looking for protocols to hopefully change to us have a pathway for normalcy. And then, just a month into the ledge session, we have this huge Texas Freeze event where the entire state shuts down and millions of Texans lose power. About almost 1,000 Texans is the current count. Unfortunately, it maybe end up being even more, lost their lives during this event. And going back to the COVID, over 50,000 Texans had lost their lives from the pandemic. So there's a lot of stuff that was happening in lives.
We should mention the ongoing thing in Texas of the uninsured crisis. We have the highest uninsured rate in the country. 20% of Texans don't have health insurance. And this has been this way for years, but that doesn't make it any less of a crisis, right? And these are the things that we could have been dealing with, and instead we were focused on some of the things we're going to talk about in a minute.
Yeah, and to your point, the Texas comptroller even did an entire fiscal notes article, which they call their newsletter, Fiscal Notes, in October, talking about the negative impacts that are happening to the Texas economy because of the number of uninsured Texans.
It is.
And we already have negative impacts because of this pandemic.
Yep.
And so, to what we're both saying, is feels like there was a lot of stuff that needed to be taken care of.
Yep.
That was avoided.
Yep. Punted down the field.
It'll just fix itself. It kind of makes you think about how sometimes we can do that in our personal lives. Like, thing that's going on. There's this work project, or there's this pain I feel in my side, or there's something. It'll probably work itself out.
Right.
No, that work project then ended up falling apart. My standing in my job place is now at risk, and now this pain in my side is leading to something that's horrible and could be deadly. And so it's like, it's unfortunate to see leaders in Texas, our governor and legislators take that approach when it impacts 30 million Texans.
Yep, it really highlights the kind of immaturity of our leadership and a lack of focus on what's really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump into these stories and kind of go down memory lane of the 87th Texas legislature.
All right, I'm going to share my screen here. So we're kind of going today in a slightly mixed up order. We're going to do the bad, the ugly, and the good here. And so, one of the big stories out of this ledge session that I'm sure most people have heard about at this point is that the legislature passed and Abbott signed an abortion ban starting at 6 weeks, which is like one of, if not the most restrictive abortion bans in the country at this point. Will certainly be challenged in court. This is probably a floater to take it to the Supreme Court and get the new conservative Republican majority there to overturn Roe v. Wade. But this is here 6 weeks in. Most women don't know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. We should also say abortion rights are supported by 54% of Texans. So this isn't even in line with the values of most Texans. It's in line with the values of Republican primary voters, but not most Texans. So this was a big move this session. We weren't able to stop it in spite of lots of people putting in a considerable amount of effort in that regard.
Yeah, and this is one of the spaces where we saw the pandemic really impact advocacy, because, typically during the ledge session, almost on a daily basis, there are rallies happening at the Capitol for various causes and various, issues that people want to see, taken up by the legislature.
Yeah.
And we just saw that there was not nearly that much of that type of activity and that in-person activity that happened. And I know Cheryl Foster, who's the reproductive rights huddle leader for Indivisible TX Lege, she made the trip down, and it was also highlighted, I believe, in the Dallas Morning News around this trip when this was being heard by the legislature early in the process. And, she went down to the Capitol to give testimony, but there was such a lack of opposition to these bills, and so many people had shown up who were anti-abortion and wanted this ban to be put in place. And in fact, so many that were present thought this ban was like not going far enough. Like what the legislature was pursuing was not enough. They wanted to go even further. And that was just really disheartening to see early in the legislative session, how the pandemic was impacting advocacy efforts of people that we work alongside with, so that we don't have these kind of laws passed that are just going to cause a lot of pain and suffering to Texans. Because to your point, a lot of women won't know they're pregnant by 6 weeks. And, this is also just an extreme punitive approach on women, and men are not a part of any of this conversation or questioning, like, what is their part in this Should there be any accountability for men at all? That doesn't happen ever at all when it comes to
Right.
reproduction. But yeah, so this was disheartening to see that through the process it eventually made it over the finish line, and it'll definitely be challenged in court, like you said, and we'll hopefully see advocates be able to come together, and there'll be a concerted effort to try to stop this overturning of Roe versus Wade.
Right. And right. And we really, like what you're saying about the people showing up for testimony and whatnot, we see the impact that the legislature's unwillingness to shift their process to accommodate COVID really had a big impact, right? Really, we should have been able to give virtual testimony and whatnot on all these things. And rather than putting in place those safety measures, they set up a system where, in order to advocate for what you believe in, you had to put your life at risk and the life of people you love at risk. And that's really, it's tragic and terrible, right?
Yeah, it goes to show that the perspective of legislators is not to serve the public or to be informed and to try to pass laws that represent what the people want, but it's instead to figure out a way to maneuver to do whatever they want to do, and whoever the powers that be that they or the faction of the Texas community that they want to serve.
Yep.
Is prioritized. And the House had some online public comments that people could make for committees. So they made a little bit of an effort, I still think tiny effort. The Senate had zero. There was nothing. In person was the only way. Every Texan can always call and email their legislators, but a part of this process during the Texas legislature is informing the committees. Yep. Being able to communicate to the committees the things that they're not considering, why the way the legislation is crafted is problematic, or why these issues are, problematic in how they're approaching it one way or the other. And so they just really shut that down. They shut that down to where they didn't have to hear from a lot of constituents.
Yep. So that was first bad. Our second bad was this permitless carry bill that was passed and signed into law. And this was, as this Texas Tribune article highlights, this was even after the El Paso shootings, where a lot of Republican leaders had promised substantive action on gun control. Instead, what we got was permitless carry, which means that there's no background checks. You don't need any kind of license to carry a gun anymore. Supposedly there's still restrictions, and if you're a felon, you can't carry a gun. If you have problems like domestic violence convictions, you can't. But how are you going to enforce any of that without a background check? It's going to rest on somebody. It's hard to even imagine, right? How any of those restrictions would actually be enforced without background checks.
Yeah, and how people get guns, right? How are you going to enforce it when people are just carrying guns in public?
Yep.
And how they got them, you don't know. Right. And they're just in the public carrying their guns and having this weapon at their side, having more people having this weapon at their side, so that situations that may happen, that may escalate, result in gun violence versus, that situation never being an option. Yeah. And so just a lot of people will say, well, people who break the laws are going to carry guns anyways. They're not law-abiding citizens, and people who are law-abiding citizens are going to go through the process. And I think the point that people are trying to make is that when you help encourage a culture to where this doesn't matter, mm-hmm. and when you help enable a culture to where, you're emboldening more of this to happen, this makes it a much more dangerous place for Texans.
Yep. Absolutely.
And that's one of the concerns, right? And El Paso lawmakers have a very recent incident that they shared with Governor Abbott and legislators and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick around the trauma and the aftermath of something like this happening in their community. And we've seen this happen in a lot of communities. And so trying to figure out ways for us to not have the gun violence we already see in our state and in our communities. If we're legitimately trying to take that approach, then this is not something that we would want to pass.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to imagine how this actually has any how this does anything but increase the amount of gun violence that we're going to see in Texas. It's scary.
And I think what's another interesting thing for people to always be reminded of is that the current Republican leadership don't really have any real values that they care about. They just have tactics to stay in power.
Yep.
And one of those tactics is to cause chaos.
Right.
That's what they do. Cause chaos among the masses. They get to stay in power. Because a great example of how they do that is they go on the news, they have press conferences about language or policies that say defund the police, or when the policies are really just trying to allocate resources beyond police officers. Let's have more mental health professionals.
Right.
Let's have different staff and resources to respond to different type of things that happen in our communities, so that it's not the default of always a police officer with a gun that's going into these situations.
Yep.
Let's diversify how we're approaching this.
Yep.
So the headlines, though, was around defunding the police. And so here you hear Governor Abbott and some of these Republican leaders like Dan Patrick, oh, we're not going to let that happen. We back the blue. We are going to support police officers. And when it came to this very bill of permitless carry, it was police chiefs,
Yep.
It was police unions, it was police officers going to the Capitol to say, this is not safe for our communities.
Yeah.
Do not pass this.
Not
we
safe
don't want
for
this.
officers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the people they say they back.
Yep.
In one side, now not listening to them when they're telling them, you're going to make our life and our job harder, because we have so many more variables to have to consider now in the situations we're going to interact in. And so this is just proof for people, which I know in some cases we're going to be preaching to the choir, but as you're talking to your community and people in your community around Republican leadership, this is the hypocrisy they are so comfortable living in.
Yep.
And they're so comfortable doing that because they have the megaphone of the press, or they have the megaphone of the office and what they have. And they feel like the masses won't pay attention and don't pay attention.
Yeah. So much of this is about flying under the radar. Yeah. All right. On to the next one.
On to the next one.
All right. So that was the bad. Now we're going to slip into some of the ugly. Actually, I'm sorry, I got it out of order here. Some of the ugly here. There was this. Oh, this should have been on the good as well. But one of the legislative priorities that Abbott had listed was bail bond reform, and it turned out that what he really meant by that was because the problem with bail, right, is that it tends to put people in jail because they're poor. Like, you can't afford to make bond, then you wind up stuck in jail, and then you wind up in this cycle where you can't go to work, you're stuck in jail because you can't pay the bail, and then you're stuck. And so it's like it's one of the ways that poor people get treated very differently by our justice system than middle class or rich people. And but when Abbott was proposing bail reform, he was talking about making the system harsher, right? Like upping the bail for people. And this was one of the priority things that he listed, which are, of course, the things that the legislature has to address first. But these bills wound up not passing. They're likely to come back up in one of the special sessions that's coming up, which we'll get to in a bit. But thankfully, at least for the time being, we were able to put this off, which is, it's good news.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge shout out to the coalition of organizations, especially the Black and brown leaders in throughout Texas that are pushing for criminal justice reform, that are pushing for these kind of bills to be stopped, and instead having bills that support communities and help make the system better. Because to your point, this is completely around making it even harder and harsher for people that have to incur the bail system.
Yep.
And just the cash bail system as a thing that we utilize. That you can have some people do the worst crimes, but because they have money, then they're going to be able to get back on the street, and so it's very impactful to different parts of our community. And so people want to address that and say, this person who got arrested for marijuana possession is having to be locked in for X amount of days, whereas this person who did a crime that impacted dozens, if not hundreds of people, is able to get on the street right away because they had the funds. How is that justice?
Right.
And so, yeah, to your point, special session, Governor Abbott has shared, this is going to be coming back. So we're going to need to have that fight and that pushback and advocates stepping up. And everyone in Texas trying to support the leaders that are helping us push back on these type of bills.
Yep. And, one other thought on this, crime is really correlated with poverty, right? So these kind of measures that make it harder for people to get out of poverty are actually going to increase crime, right? This is not a way of the net effect of this is not going to be to reduce crime. It's going to be to keep people in situations that are dire circumstances where they have to turn to petty theft and whatever else in order to survive. And the way to reduce crime is to get people out of those situations. This has been shown again and again and again. And yet we don't seem to take that lesson here. And instead we go for these like more punitive measures as though they're going to help, which is the wrong approach. So yeah, special session. Let's make sure this doesn't happen this way.
Yeah, it's the strong arm of justice for some, and super leniency for others. And it's hard for people to see how not only is it the class divide that this is impacting, but it's the racial divide that this is impacting, and why people push against this stuff and use this as an example of how white supremacy is in our justice system, and how it benefits people who typically are at the top of our caste system in America, which are white men. But it definitely is meant to penalize as many Black and brown community members as possible.
Yep. One of those kind of subtle and hidden ways that that systemic stuff just gets entrenched. All right, turning to the big. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
Jason, I wanted to share. I put the link. I think there was something you had about.
I moved it.
Oh, perfect.
All right, I had things a little out of order.
No worries. We're back in sync.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So one of course, as you mentioned, the Texas freeze happened at the beginning of the legislative session here, and we did see some mild reform of things, but also in ways that are still quite problematic. So there were the big one was SB 3 to address the power grid problems, which essentially made some small changes to ERCOT, the regulatory authority in Texas, and required some winterization without much teeth to it, honestly. But it doesn't really, it wasn't really the kind of fundamental reform that we need to see. And it came with a lot of downsides. So there was some winterizing, but it's required, but the penalties are very low for not doing it. That's one thing. There was no real relief for consumers who were hit by big charges through this, or those of us who couldn't work that week and had lost income and all those things. But there were $9 billion in ratepayer-backed bonds approved to help bail out insurance or electricity providers. Which, I mean, the whole point of this thing was supposed to be that it's a free market system, right? It's supposed to give us the best outcome. So here we all got screwed, and now we've got, as ratepayers, we're on the hook for $9 billion to the very same people who screwed us. So I don't know how you can have a free market system that is it's all free market as long as they're making the profits, and then it's on the rest of us when they get hit. It seems like a quite backward system. And there were no reforms in this, for example, connecting Texas's power grid to the national grid, which would be the easiest fix for us to do to make sure that power didn't go out. So none of these core things, or going to a system that's more regulated instead of this crazy free market system. Any of those things could have been substantial improvements, and we didn't see any of that here.
Yeah, this was a very scary thing that happened in Texas. And when you go back and look at the news reporting, as this happened and as people were sharing the different communication that was happening, I think that at one point we were minutes away from a true catastrophic breakdown of our electric grid to where it would have taken weeks and months to restore.
Yep. 4.5 minutes.
Yeah, 4.5 minutes. And so to see how close we did incur disaster, but to see how close we were to multiplying that disaster in such a profound way, and then for the legislators and for Governor Abbott to respond with, I don't know, just felt like very little motivation for the everyday Texan, but more motivation for the industry, so that they are protected, and any negative experience they had in terms of loss of revenue or anything, we want to prop that up. And this is what frustrates a lot of people, is that, look, we're all taxpayers. This is the public's money.
Yep.
And when the public wants to use that money to help everyday Texans, that somehow is a bad thing. But when the public money is used to prop up corporations that have already made millions and billions of dollars and really benefit few, and they get to actually benefit from it into their pocketbook, somehow that's okay. And this is just a perversion of what leadership is meant to be for citizens and for residents in Texas. We're supposed to be collectively coming together with these tax funds to solve these problems so that we can all try to achieve and pursue, good life, happiness, have our liberties and all that kind of stuff. But instead, this is just a piggy bank for the people who are rich and powerful to continue to fail us, to continue to cause things that Texans lose their lives over. And to continue to have to work whatever jobs they get to contribute to this tax pool, but to not get wages to be able to get their families out of these environments, especially when we go back talking about poverty and things like that.
Yep.
And so this is what's frustrating, to see how horrible our leadership is in Texas, and that this is something that millions of Texans, all of us, experience. Like, this isn't something that happened to somebody else and we heard a story about or anything. No. We all experienced this and saw this happen right before our eyes. And not even that happening was enough for our leaders to respond for our benefit, to help protect individual Texans. But instead, it was for corporations and for people who already have money and already in power. So this is why we just need a change in leadership. We need a change in who is deciding these things and working on these things in our state, because we're in a very perilous situation. There's news stories already being shared with their reporting and what they're looking at, that our summer could put us in a dire situation with our electric grid. And so it's not just about winterization and about having this stuff for winter weather, it's that our electric grid is fragile.
Yep.
And because of the extreme weather that's happening due to climate change, that we're not prepared to be able to handle these swings to the degree that we should be. And that's just dangerous.
Yeah. And as you pointed out earlier, this isn't just some abstract thing or an inconvenience. This was the latest estimates are suggesting that somewhere between like 700 and 1,000 people died as a result of this. And that those are real lives that were taken by this. And we're not getting the kind of reform that could keep that from happening again. At the same time, the focus has been on all these other things that are not in line with what Texans want and that aren't helping to improve the lives of people here.
Absolutely.
So this was the ugly, right? It wasn't all bad, but there was a lot missing there. And we're going to turn our, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, I got all out of line here, out of sync here. We're going to turn our eyes to the good now. There was a lot of effort in this session and a lot of concern, certainly by you and I and other people involved in Indivisible TX Lege about this raft of anti-trans bills that had come up. And fortunately, none of them passed. We managed to stop all of them, which is really spectacular. And this is the one I found the most relevant tweet for. The SB 29 was the one about not allowing transgender kids or forcing them to play on sports teams that were identified with their biological sex rather than their preferred gender. And a lot of this one, as did a lot of these, made it through the Senate. So the Senate would vote and approve on it, and then got stuck in the House. So some of the differences in the leadership there on the Republican side really were helpful in putting a stop to some of the more hateful stuff that was happening. So, hooray for this.
Yeah, absolutely. And this went through the whole gambit of these different areas, right? Some of this legislation is ugly from the get-go. Getting it through the process is ugly. And if it passes, it's ugly, right?
Yep.
And this is one of those things that started off very bad, went ugly through the process, because at one point, because of all the amazing testimony that was given, it was thought that this bill had died. But then it resurfaced. And so it's just the ugliness of the legislative process and how people are using different tactics and different legislation to barter with. But then landing on the good because it was fortunately stopped. And this is going to be one of the other things that I believe Abbott's going to want to prioritize in the special session, or at least Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick wants Governor Abbott to do. We'll see if that ends up happening. But yeah, this is just causing trauma when we don't need to cause trauma. And it's the lack of willingness to understand what transgender students are going through, and instead figuring out ways how to support them. Yeah. Our legislature continues to find ways to make things punitive for individuals and for groups that are already marginalized groups, but they never want to be punitive to corporations. Going back to the example of the Texas Freeze, their actions can cause the death of Texans. And it's like, wow, how can we help you not to kill people next time? Well, let's do that. Let's not hold you accountable for doing that. How many billions of dollars do we need to help you not kill people next time? Whereas when we look at bills like SB 29, it's purely hateful, punitive, and just something that is causes a lot of pain to members of our community.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. The other big thing on the good news was, and probably everybody has heard of this, I heard about this, I imagine, was, but the voter suppression bills, there was a House version, HB 6, but the Senate version was the one that really kind of almost made it all the way through. SB 7 was killed by a last minute walkout of Democrats in the House, who all got together and broke quorum at the last minute so that they couldn't hold a vote on this. And so it died at the very tail end of the session, not the special session, the session. And this is one of those things that was like a really wonderfully dramatic piece of legislative maneuvering here that I think really, I certainly feel energized by it. We were talking earlier, and it sounds like you do too. And I think that's true for a lot of people across the country. It was great to see Democrats really stand up and not just let this go, like go to what's considered a kind of extreme measure in order to stop it. And I would love to see them do more of using whatever procedural tools they can to slow these things down. I think it's inspiring to people, and it's the right thing to do. You know, they have power. They need to use it to stop bad things from happening.
Yeah, this was definitely a jolt. One organizer in Texas, one leader in Texas, I think shared with me that it was a jolt of mojo that we needed in the legislative session, because it was there was so much that was ugly and negative, and people had to keep, trying to advocate, rally Texans around. And this was that jolt of mojo that they're like, yes, we can do things together. We have power. And I think that's the big message of this action from the Texas Democrats, is that it was empowering. And too often we see Democratic leaders not willing to go to those lengths, not willing to make those decisions, because there could be a response to you showing your power. Yep. And too often we've seen, well, we don't want to have that response of power from, let's say, Governor Abbott or the Republican legislators that are not on board with us. So let's just, concede, and, we did our best, but we're not going to try to do everything we can. And this is what Texans want to see. This is why now Texas legislators, state legislators, are getting profiled and interviewed on the national stage, because this was something that was, amazing that happened, and that people want to see happen. You're elected. We want you to make sure that you are not just giving in to the horrible legislation we see prioritized, like those of Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who, as we've mentioned, only tool is for chaos. It's not because they're trying to do anything on behalf of Texans. They won't even agree with, police chiefs and police officers if it's not to their convenience. So they really don't care, other than people making money and those select few making money that they want to make money. But with SB 7, we're actually able to stop this, get attention around it, so more Texans understand why we need to keep opposing legislation like this. We've seen record voting turnout in Texas. 2020, we had 11.3 million Texans, I believe, but we still had about 9.5 million Texans not vote.
Yep.
And so breaking a record in Texas is still a pretty low bar. What are we going to do to expand voting so more Texans are a part of this process, versus the reaction that Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and Republican legislators to say, this is too much already. We need to stop this.
Right.
Getting to 11 million, even though there's 9 million to go, I don't want to get more people out to vote. I just want to stop these people from voting. That way I can stay in power. For Texans, for us to understand how horrible that is to have leaders in place with that mentality, we need to vote them out, and we need to get them out. And so if we can stop legislation like SB 7, it gives us a chance of doing that.
Yep. It's like with the uninsured rate. If we manage to get from 20% to 19% uninsured, and our leaders are like, yay, we've got more Texans insured than ever before, but we're still last nationally. It's really, it's not that meaningful, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, I'm with you. We gotta be pushing this and really I would love to see more offense too, to like, let's get more of the kinds of things that helped the turnout in 2020 out there, like in more places. Statewide, we should have drive-through voting and 24-hour voting, all these things that make it easier.
Yeah,
And
why not? Drive-through voting seems like
not?
super convenient.
Yeah, and we can still have security around it and whatnot. The 2020 election here in Texas and everywhere else was the most secure election we've ever had, and so these aren't mutually exclusive. The other thing about the Democrats doing this is that it has really served to flip the chaos a bit, right? It started to sow some chaos and discord in the ranks of the Republican leadership that we're starting to see, which is a good move, I think, to slow things down. Right. So, Abbott responded to this with a couple of different moves. The first was that he's going to defund the legislature, use a line item veto on the budget to defund the legislature, which of course, legislators make $600 a month while they're in session. And most of them don't need $600 a month, right? The people who are really going to be hurt by not getting, by the legislature losing funding are the staffers and the people who keep the grounds clean and all those kinds of folks, right? It's not going to be the legislature. So we have Abbott grandstanding with the budget. But then also calling for a special session. So we now know there's going to be probably at least 2 special sessions this year, right? In the fall, we're going to have one for redistricting because we won't even have the census data until September. But then it seems likely, we don't have a date yet, but there seems likely to be one over the summer where Abbott is saying that he has to have voter suppression. He calls it election integrity legislation. If it was really election integrity about restoring people's faith, then it would be banning politicians from spreading lies about elections.
Right.
So he needs his voter suppression legislation, and he needs bail legislation. So these are probably going to come up. And I really loved this response from the House Democrats to Abbott's call for the special sessions, that they said you wouldn't call a special session for COVID, for mass shootings, or for Hurricane Harvey, but you want one for voter suppression. You're ready to have that fight. This is the right response to that, right?
Absolutely, the exact right response. Call it for what it is.
Yep.
And big shout out to Ed Espinoza, who's leads Progress Texas and the whole Progress Texas team. They've been putting out some great articles and just highlighting a lot of these different pieces, as well as some other great media outlets in Texas. But want to give a shout out to Progress Texas because this is the kind of language we need to make sure Texans are understanding. And these are the kind of considerations we need Texans to understand. Like, governor can call special session anytime he wants. He has that ability as the governor of Texas, and he has refused to do that when we are in crisis. Yep. And when Texans are suffering and when Texans need help. Nope, Governor Abbott won't do anything during those times. But when he has something that he wants to do to help keep him in power, like suppressing the vote, yep, that's the priority. And I think this is an example for people to see the ego of Governor Greg Abbott, that he sees himself as king. He sees himself as a king instead of, he's the executive branch, there's a legislative branch, and just because you have priorities as a governor, you have this legislative body that needs to come together and figure out how to make certain things happen, as well as have their own priorities. Yep. And it's working together to figure out how we can make that happen to help Texans. That's not his approach. His approach is, I'm king governor, I want this, I get this, and if you don't give it to me, I'll make you suffer. That is not a public leader of the public. That's not a public servant at all. And Texans need to see this about Governor Abbott. His ego is huge because Texas is so large, because Texas does have such a big hand in a lot of the direction of the country and even of the world, because we have so many people here because of the size of our economy. Our economy is larger than a lot of countries. Um, Being governor has really gotten to him, and he thinks he's the master of the universe now. And he's not. He's not even the master of his own legislative process and system in the state,
Right.
because we have other elected officials to offset things that they don't agree with and don't think will be good for Texans.
Yep.
And so seeing him throw his tantrum, hopefully is motivation for Texans to get him out of office in 2022. We don't need him.
Yep. Amen. Also, this is from Progress Texas, who this is the organization that Ed Espinoza runs. And along the same lines, I really liked that they're, if we're coming back for a special session, can we also use it to fix our energy grid and get rid of the requirement that we're going to foot the bill for these energy regulators? So I think I want to see more and more of this, right? Like, these are the priorities. Abbott's focused on this thing that isn't a priority. He's wasting taxpayer dollars to do it. Here are the priorities. If Democrats are elected or non-Republicans are elected, new leadership is elected, then these are the things you're going to get Texans we're going to focus on.
Right. And I love that they put a picture of Dade Phelan, because this is great. This is a great opportunity to bring up the Speaker of the House, Dade Phelan, because you've even heard in a lot of our frustration, Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, but we really need to talk about House Speaker Dade Phelan. The hope when he was nominated as the House Speaker was that he was going to be balanced and he was going to try to help the House side of the legislature really work together. And instead, what we saw, we even heard Representative Nicole Collier speak on his behalf for his nomination and her belief in him, of his ability to work together. And yet you saw House Speaker Phelan appoint some of the most divisive legislators like Briscoe Cain to committee chairs, where Briscoe Cain was a part of the elections committee, completely incompetent, has no idea what he's doing, doesn't know his own history whatsoever, which other legislators had to inform him on. And the other things that he helped move forward in the process, to where, going back to Briscoe Cain, you had hundreds of Texans show up to talk about HB 6, to give testimony to that committee, to inform them around their concerns around this. And so then Briscoe Cain makes a mistake on purpose or by accident, so the committee meeting is ended that day, and all of those Texans don't get to give testimony. And so that level of incompetence, did we hear anything from Dade Phelan when that happened? Did we hear anything about all the Texans that traveled down to Austin to try to help be a part of this process? No. And he flew under the radar so much this ledge session that any noise or any speeches he gives about working together should not be trusted, because he showed in this legislative session he is willing to support the most radical legislation in our process and let it move forward versus serving Texans.
Yeah.
So we don't trust him, and we are encouraging you not to trust him either.
Yeah. Yeah. He's like John Cornyn that way. He puts on this face of being a reasonable, approachable guy, but then when the cards are down, he's always kind of side up with the folks who are trying to beat up on people, really.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Well, we mentioned this already, but this was Abbott's tweet. And again, I like Progress Texas's take on this. This is Abbott's tweet about vetoing the line item, vetoing the part of the budget that funds the legislature. And that it's going to be an interesting special session with an unfunded legislature here. So, and it kind of highlights just how this whole move is just pure showmanship, right? Abbott's anticipating people running against him in next year, 2022, and he's moving to try and look like a powerful guy here, because that's what his base responds to. But it's really pretty ridiculous, and kind of the equivalent of holding your breath until somebody does what you want.
Yeah, this is the true temper tantrum of his responses. He had a couple of these reactions after what happened, and you could see him just fuming, thinking of him fuming in his office or at his home, just frustrated, and then he releases some statement, and then fume some more. Then he has a press conference, fume some more. Well, then now I'll do this. I won't even pay you. And it's such a joke. To your point, legislators don't even do this. It's unfortunate that we don't pay legislators enough, because it leaves out a lot of Texans from being able to run from office because they need their day-to-day job to pay the bills. Whereas these legislators, $600 is not going to break them.
Yep.
And so it's like, okay, whatever, I have independent, income, or I have enough wealth that this isn't going to affect me. But what this would affect, which is what great reporting like organizations like Progress Texas and others have been doing, is that it's not paying the staff members who aren't rich. It's not paying the janitors who aren't rich. And it's not paying for all of these other people that help the capital in the legislative process go. And that's who he's taking out his frustration on.
Yep.
And this is why him being this spoiled little, fake king that he thinks he is of Texas, is at the one side hilarious to see him squirm and throw a temper tantrum over this and think that this is actually a viable thing that's going to matter. And on the same time, other side, scary, because this guy really thinks he's some kind of king of Texas.
Yeah.
And he is completely incompetent. He has zero interest for Texans, as thousands, tens of thousands have died from various things that have happened over this last year and a half between the pandemic and the Texas freeze. And so if I was a Democratic legislator, I would say, here's your $600. You can take it and shove it, because that's not going to stop us from organizing and potentially not meeting quorum on anything you want done in this special session. And I think that's what the Democratic legislators were able to show, that if they are able to organize and stay intact and stay on the same page, it's going to force them to compromise and to actually see if they could work together on some legislation, versus just conceding to whatever Governor Abbott wants, Governor Abbott gets. Right. That's not how it's supposed to work.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that one of the things that I really liked about this Democratic move of walking out and forcing at least this bill to go to a special session is that it really has created tension between the leaders of these different branches in the government. So we have Dan Patrick and Abbott pointing fingers at each other. We have Dan Patrick and Dave Phelan pointing fingers at each other. And you start to see how little competence there is there in terms of running these institutions for the benefit of Texans. And so just to highlight this, Patrick was he's not saying Dave Phelan here, but that's the undercurrent, right? That they had unwisely taken a couple of days off in the closing weeks to pressure the Senate to pass lagging House bills. And of course, there were tweets from or interviews or whatnot with Dave Phelan where he was saying, well, the Senate was in charge of coming up with the final version and we got it back, and there were all these problems with it, 12 points of order, they said. And so you have this back and forth going, and you're really starting to see the divisions within the Republican Party at this point, where Dan Patrick is all about culture wars. That's what he's built his whole political career on, and what has propelled him into power there. And so he throws that kind of meat, and you see Dave Phelan more on the corporate side, and Abbott trying to straddle it all, and it's all kind of starting to crack a bit. So, which to me says there's opportunity here for Democrats and people who are opposed to this, if they can be clever about using these divisions to really not make this an easy passage. You know.
Yeah, I think this is where Dan Patrick, he if there's ever an example that there are no values by these leaders, look no further than Dan Patrick. He has no allegiance to anybody but himself and his ability to get power. So in essence, everyone's the enemy if he doesn't get his way and if he doesn't get what he wants. Even grandmothers, because we need to go back to the pandemic and saying that grandparents would be willing to die for this economy. The economy is important to Dan Patrick. That's what makes Dan Patrick rich and makes him happy and helps him have what he wants in his life. If your grandparents are not willing to die for it, then shame on them. I mean, there is no links to this guy of who he'll pick on to be able to say they're the problem, because he's never the problem.
Right.
And so when we talk about Abbott's ego, Dan Patrick's sitting right next to him with an equally sized, if not larger, ego. And I think one of the reporters, I don't know, is it Scott Braddock or is it Chuck Lindell who calls him?
I think it's Scott Braddock. Calls him
Little Dan. instead of Lieutenant Governor, it's Little Governor Dan Patrick. And it is a little bit like he has this little man syndrome of not being the governor, right? And so he wants to flex his power. And another example was when he didn't pass this legislation and he said, we need a special session for this. Before Abbott, saw what happened with SB 7.
That's right.
We're going to need a special session for this stuff. And Abbott was like, well, that's just goofy and silly. I make the decision for a special session. But Dan Patrick wanted to be in the press to say, this needs to happen, special session, and I demand it or whatever, and this guy's a joke. This guy's a joke, which, I think we need to continue to help Texans understand, like, it's one thing if you are traditionally voting Republican and you think the Republican Party is the party where you have your values and things you want.
Yeah.
These people are not Republican Party values that you may understand it as an everyday Texan. These people are just about power. They literally don't care about anybody but themselves.
Yep.
And that's not the leaders we need in Texas when you have 30 million of us living together in the state.
That's right. Yep. And just looking forward a little bit towards this SB 7 special session, there's been this suggestion from Dave Phelan that the kind of omnibus SB 7 bill that had a bunch of different sections outlaw or dealing with different parts of the voting process. He was suggesting the possibility it could be broken up into smaller individual bills that would address specific areas, which in some ways I think would be really great if it happened, because it gives us a lot more opportunity to push back on the worst parts of these bills. It's likely that some portion of this is going to get passed, and this approach would allow us to minimize the damage, I think, of it, rather than having it all lumped into one giant bill that everybody has to vote for or against.
Yeah, it'll hopefully help us have those targeted conversations around these different aspects of this bill, like you're saying. And that could hopefully help us in terms of organizing and advocating and informing the legislature of why these things are not wanted by Texans.
Right.
I think for me, I have a small concern because everything they do raises a red flag for me in the sense of warning, danger kind of thing. And I'm curious if this is also potentially a tactic by spreading people out. Having all these different legislation pieces being moved forward that we can't catch everything, kind of like the whack-a-mole approach. Like you just can't get to all of them. And so because, as we shared with y'all, we don't trust Dave Phelan.
Yeah, right.
It's always trying to figure out what is his ulterior motive to doing this, and why would he be putting this suggestion out. So definitely an opportunity to help us in terms of advocating and organizing, because we have specific targets that we can then focus on. But it is going to depend on how the Speaker of the House puts this legislation and breaks this apart? Is it still all going to go through the elections committee, or because he breaks it out, he's going to put it through multiple committees, and then we got to pay attention in multiple spaces? And so it'll be interesting.
And of course, this is at odds with Abbott, who is just fine with the current bill. Presumably Dan Patrick as well is fine with the bill as is. So this is one of those areas where there's some daylight between these guys that might work in our favor,
Yeah, it gives us opportunity for sure. I think it gives us opportunity, and it shows that they don't really prepare for anything, because they just expect to do what they want without any resistance. So they don't actually think through and have a plan. And we saw this on the federal side, which we don't interact really with the federal side and with Congress. We focus on state legislature, but it does remind me a little bit of how the Affordable Care Act has always been a target of Republicans to dismantle, but they actually never had a plan for healthcare.
Right.
And then when it came down to it, Republicans voted against getting rid of the Affordable Care Act, like John McCain. And so it's like they just want something, but they actually have no idea what to do with it or how to make it happen. Yeah. And it feels very much like SB 7. You're seeing that right now.
Yeah. All right. Last one here. Again, we're starting to see some real cracks in the Republican coalition. And we'll see what happens with this over the next year. But, the Republican Party, the Texas Republican Party chair was Alan West, who was a guy who had been a congressman in Florida. He lost his election there. He's kind of a controversial figure who likes to make outlandish statements, and was recently seen at the QAnon conference in Dallas, along with Louis Gohmert and some other folks. And at the one where Michael Flynn called for a military coup here to reinstate Trump. But anyway, Alan West resigned as Republican Party chair this week. There's some speculation that he might be running against Governor Abbott for the gubernatorial nomination in 2022. So that's happening. Ken Paxton also has drawn a primary challenger. Indicted Attorney General Ken Paxton, we should say. George P. Bush has jumped in to run against him on the Republican side. And it sounds like Abbott's going to be primaried, maybe by Alan West, but also by Sid Miller, who's agriculture commissioner now. And so we're really seeing some division on that side. And it's actually find it a hopeful sign that there's some disarray there. It might be marking the extent of the Republican tide right now in Texas. That's my optimistic take on it.
Yeah, optimistic take. Yeah, because it is interesting. There's not a lot of details around why he left.
Yeah.
And so, Alan West was an agent of chaos, as we has shared that the Republican leadership in Texas, that's their go-to, that's their MO, be agents of chaos, because they really don't care about actually doing the job. They just want to cause chaos and benefit financially and with power as much as possible. So Alan West coming to Texas was already an interesting move, and then seeing that he got the party chair and went as far right as he possibly could, and being outlandish with a lot of his expectations and his claims and everything. It is curious to see, was he ousted, or was that just a part of the plan to get the spotlight, to get some media, to get some traction, to get some name recognition in Texas, so that now he can run for something like the more chaotic he could be, the more outlandish he could be, the more media attention he would get. And that just helped him with whatever he's trying to do. And so, our hope is that whatever he's trying to do is unsuccessful, and that he just leaves, because he is that snake oil type salesman who is now going from state to state, it feels like, to build his brand so that he can fool some people into hiring him to do something.
Yeah.
And hopefully Texans don't take the bait in trying to elect him into some position, because he'd have no interest in serving the interests of Texans. And so, yeah, this is interesting development. Your optimistic take, I think there is something there for sure, because there's this iron fist view of Republicans in Texas. And, if their crazy is starting to seep out in all these different ways and fracture, I thought one of the hilarious things about the opposition to Governor Abbott was Don Huffines, I think, who was claiming himself as the Trump candidate for governor, and then Trump endorses Greg Abbott. And it's like these guys don't know anything. They are just a clown car of fools, unfortunately, for Texas. But we really need to just help inform Texans, inform our neighbors, inform each other. This is the hashtag you've seen us use. The hashtag we're going to continue to use over the next 18 months is hashtag Texas deserves better. Because we do. There's so many things that we can solve. There's a pathway for Texas to be better and even more amazing, and more people a part of all of those amazing benefits and things that are happening. And we just need to make those choices to work on that versus dealing with the chaotic clowns that we have right now.
Yep. Amen. That's all I've got. We are going to be paying attention as we go forward to the special sessions that are coming up. Follow us on Twitter. We have this crazy Twitter handle, Indivisible TX Lege. And stay tuned for what's coming and how we're going to be responding. And we hope to see all down at the Capitol sometime this summer, pushing back on this stuff and getting ready for the redistricting battle that's going to happen in the fall. It's going to be a big deal as well. So we've got our work ahead of us, but we're here. We hope you will be too.
Yeah, and that's one of the highlights of this work is that we are Texans all across the state. Myself, I'm in Fort Worth. Jason, you're down there in Austin.
Yep.
We have organizers in the coastal cities and Houston, San Antonio, all across the state, and in between Waco. Cheryl's out there in Waco. And I don't know what I would do going through this process of having to see these headlines and see what's going on, and maybe only focusing on my legislators without connecting with Texans and Indivisible TX Lege.
Yeah.
And so it has been an amazing benefit for us to be able to work together, to learn together, and to advocate together. And so we encourage all of you out there to continue to get connected, whether it's our organization or it's one of our partner organizations or allies that we work with. Get plugged in, find the thing that you want to make a difference on, and let's do it. The pie is big in Texas. Everything's bigger in Texas, right? This is what we go with. And the pie of work in Texas is huge, and no single one of us, person or organization, are going to be able to tackle it all.
Yep.
We need each other. And so look for the opportunity to get plugged in. We're going to keep doing some work around highlighting our partners so that you're aware of what they're doing, which communities they're working in. So there's an opportunity to plug in if you feel like that's the space you want to be in. But be ready for 2022 as well. These two special sessions are going to be super taxing. We're going to be doing a lot of work around that. But then 2022 is going to be a huge election for Texas. And you hear a lot of people say, well, every election is being sold as the biggest election. And a part of the reason why that's true is because we have decades of progress that we need to resolve and that we haven't addressed. And every election that we don't get the momentum to solve those problems and to make progress, we have the unfortunate situation where we may go backwards. And so each election does become the most important election because of the decades of progress we still need to address and we need to achieve. And so 2022 is going to be the biggest election for Texas in our history right now, because we have so much going on, and we try to highlight some of that chaos. The other thing I do want to highlight for everybody really quick is we are going to have a special event on the 20th that is available for any Texan to participate. This is our Indivisible TX Lege end of session social, which will be June 20th, Sunday at 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. We're going to do some fun stuff together. As we've shared, we worked really hard. This session was horrible. But we're going to have a casual event to celebrate, to continue this reflection tour, because this is a big part of the work we do. The TX Lege usually only happens every 2 years. So you want to try to capture and remember as much of that happened, because it'll be 2 years or 18 months. So it happens again. And you want to be able to have key things to remind you. But we want to review the best and worst legislators this year. We highlighted a few of them in our conversation today. But we also want to talk about the future and share with you with what Indivisible TX Lege is doing as we keep moving forward. So we have some internal things we'll be doing. We'll have some external things happening. And Jason, I'm really excited to talk about this best and worst on the 20th, because one key legislator we didn't highlight that we will be highlighting on the 20th is Representative Charles Dutton, who was the House Pub Ed Chair. And a part of the reason why SB 29 got so much traction. And so be ready, join us so that we can talk about and have potentially some actions to continue to let Representative Dutton know that his leadership in the House Pub Ed Chair, his service as a Democratic legislator is no longer wanted. And we really need to have a replacement there as well. So whether it's Republican or Democrat, if you're not serving the needs of Texans, then you don't belong, and we want you out.
Yep.
And so we'll keep doing the good work. Our organizer is going to take a few more days to continue to unwind and recoup. And then we'll be back with you.
Yep. Y'all take care.